Groundhog's Day. Let's try this one more time. Tulsi Gabbard, instead of coming on to this show, where she would have most likely an awesome interview, she decided to go into NPR and instead had an outright horrible interview. That host at NPR should be outright ashamed of herself. Interview was dramatically bad. For the first maybe 2 minutes, she kind of allowed Tulsi to talk a little bit about what she was about. But after that, it was just outright smears. I mean, in some cases, it got outright bigoted. I mean, I'll explain what I mean as we go through the video. The video at some points is even hard to listen to. But the host essentially brings up one smear after the next that political opponents and people who were angry or for the most part just disliked her threw at her during the campaign. And not just that, even the neocon worldview that the host is taking when she's pursuing this interview. It's outright astonishing. Let's take a look at this horrible interview. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox After Dark, because it is, 1 in the morning here, 12:46. Guys, if you dig this content, you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Look, I followed Tulsi Gabbard, I think, this entirety of this campaign, and, there have been things about her that I like, things about her that I don't particularly like, but for the most part, her foreign policy, she has been, I think I've said this before, my sword on the notion of foreign policy. When she goes onto those shows and she says things that none of the other candidates say without any hedge, despite pushback that she often gets in these interviews, because her particular foreign policy takes a particular foreign policy of non-intervention. Not necessarily anti-war, but at the very least, let's stop these regime change wars, as she's so fond of saying. This interview with NPR doesn't necessarily let Tulsi Gabbard explain who Tulsi Gabbard is at all, at least not in a way that is not non-adversarial. And again, at certain parts, deeply offensive. I heard Tulsi Gabbard make this argument about religious bigotry before, and sometimes I quibble about whether or not it's true, because sometimes people throw that stuff up as somewhat of a smokescreen. But I have to be honest, over the course of the campaign, I've started to agree with her on this. We have a very particular point of view of the world and certain things that we are okay with. We have an American view of the world often, especially when you're talking about media. And in an odd way, we're not familiar with India, let alone Indian religions. And so we look at our voodoo and we say this particular fantasy is okay, but this other fantasy is a little bit weird, and I can call it weird, despite the fact that, this particular point of view has many mystical elements, just like and bigotries associated with it as religions here. I mean, even if you're talking about Christianity, I just found this interview to be shocking in regards to the point of view of the person who's talking to her. She has that soft, melodic voice, like she's a psychologist or something like that. But what she's saying is outright horrendous. At least I thought it was. You can choose for yourself. Let me know what you think. I gotta be honest, I didn't particularly like this. If I can find my display, there it is. All right, let's hear it. Tulsi Gabbard on what this is, WBUR, but if I am not mistaken, this is the woman from NPR. It sounds like Terry Gross, maybe. Let's see who it is. This is WBUR. I will be interjecting. If you don't want to hear me interject, you can just open it up yourself. The link is at the bottom.
Yesterday, Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard qualified to be the 12th Democratic presidential candidate on the debate stage in October, and which is the science of self-discovery. Gabbard's father, a follow-up question to ask about that path into wars. Here's our conversation. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, welcome.
Thank you.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
And let's start there. What is it that you're saying that's resonating with voters?
First of all, it's no surprise that we've gotten this news because we've been consistently polling in the top 10 in just about every early state poll. And what I have been focused on, what I'm going to continue to focus on, debate or no debate, is on meeting directly with voters, listening to them, sharing with them my message about bringing the principles of service above self to the White House, ending these wasteful, counterproductive regime change wars, and redirecting our taxpayer dollars, our precious resources, towards serving the very real and urgent needs of the American people. Things like healthcare, education, infrastructure, protecting our environment.
When you say healthcare, are you for Medicare for all? If you can just tick through the list more specifically.
Yes, I prefer to call it Medicare Choice, where we are ensuring quality health care for all people, regardless of how little they may have in their pocket or their bank account, while maintaining their freedom of choice. If they've got an employer-sponsored plan or a union-sponsored plan that they're happy with, they should have the opportunity to do so. But the bottom line being that in the wealthiest nation in the world, there is no excuse that we still have far too many Americans who are underinsured or uninsured and who are one healthcare emergency away from total financial disaster.
Yeah. We'll talk about the thing that seems to be number one on your list, which is national security. And
to be fair to Tulsi Gabbard, if Medicare Choice is indeed Medicare for all with just the option of being able to keep a plan if you're a part of a union, see, my problem here is the employer-based plan, because the employer-based plan means healthcare lingers, and I don't want healthcare to linger. I want to put a knife in it. I want it to end. If private insurance is there to do some kind of, penis extension, fair enough. But for all intents and purposes, I don't want it to exist. It is a leech on our system, and it is a leech that I am perfectly willing to burn to ashes. Medicare for All does that for all intents and purposes. Medicare for All is a very specific bill. I understand some people really like Tulsi, but this is not Medicare for All. This is something else. And this is something else to such a degree that she decided to name it something else, just like many of the other people in the race that were with these kind of weird names. Medicare for All, Medicare for people, with bad backs, Medicare for X, or whatever that is. She names this something else. But let's keep going. My only point was, that's not Medicare for All. Medicare for All is very specific. It's a bill. It's a bill. And there's another bill in the House of Representatives that works in coordination with it. Let's hear. Let's let her keep going. I already did this video.
And not intervening in other countries' squabbles. Some people feel that has sort of blinded you to the leaders who need addressing. We're reminded this week about your comments about Assad. NPR reported on those documents that were smuggled out of Syria that show evidence of torture on the part of his regime, violation of international law. You have been called, and it's not very pleasant, but a toady for Assad. Do you think he's a war criminal?
Here's the thing.
That's an astonishing question. And I hate doing videos twice because I don't necessarily like having to say the exact same thing twice. But that's an astonishing question. The point of view, even the lead up to the question, George Bush tortured people. I don't know if she knows that. George Bush tortured people. We had a gulag out there in Guantanamo Bay, where it was a house of horrors in regards to the tortures that were taking place at that prison that was sponsored by us. Not just George Bush. You realize there was a black site in Thailand that the current CIA director, Gina Haspel, quote unquote bloody Gina Haspel, worked at. She destroyed the tapes. We know she destroyed the tapes. That's something that is well known at this point. And nevertheless, she ended up with this job. Obama ends up getting torture tapes that are so bad, he puts them in his library, which essentially hides them from the public for 20 years? We tortured. And if we're going into this breaking of international law, George Bush invaded a country on the premise of a lie. The crimes that were committed in Iraq. Do you realize John Bolton was literally going after the International Criminal Court? Because even though we're not a signatory of it, great for us, Afghanistan is. And some of the crimes that our troops committed in Afghanistan would have had John Bolton on the hook. if George Bush was a dictator in some African republic and killed not even 1 million, let's be generous, 100,000, he would be in a prison right now. Let's say 200,000, he would be in a prison right now. If some tin-pot dictator in Africa did what George Bush did, they would have dragged him before the Hague and had him hung. I hope you understand what I'm saying. This notion that you're looking at the world through the perspective of, hey, some of these people need to be dealt with. I tell you who's not going to put on a helmet and go running out there to quote-unquote deal with somebody in a particular country. The host. The host will not be putting on a hat and running out there to deal with anybody. The host will sit here and make proclamations of quote-unquote need to be dealt with. I don't know if the host knows this, but the gang, the mafia that's ahead of Saudi Arabia, that royal family that we keep in business, is a totalitarian state that is out there crucifying people and putting heads on pikes. Does she know that? Does he need to be dealt with? Because we seem to be pretty damn friendly to him. What about Netanyahu? Nobody makes issue about Netanyahu. But he's holding, at the very least was, because he's about to be out of office, but he's holding an open-air ghetto. No issue. It's astonishing how she has little issue with the friends of ours. What about Bolsonaro? The way he was talking about gays and trying to bring back this kind of junta that they had in Brazil in years past. Does she have an issue with him? I guess I'm making the point that she seems to be pretty blinded from the standpoint of our friends, or at the very least our quote-unquote friends that the United States calls our friends, as opposed to people we don't particularly like. Missing the point that our friends is just as bad as some of the people we don't particularly like. So let Tulsi answer. It's a horrible question. And by the way, the question didn't need to be asked this way. If you are curious about her foreign policy, are you saying that you can't ask this question in a better way than, hey, that guy's a horrible guy, right? Right? That's a horrible question. That's a horrible question. You presuppose a worldview within the context of the question. Now, ultimately, you're only going to get her to say yes or no. But is that really what you want? Like, is that really what you need? And is that really informative from the standpoint of asking a question about, is this a bad guy? And do you agree with me that this is a bad guy? That's an astonishingly bad question. The question could be phrased differently. That's my point. Hey, you seem to be willing to have conversations with people who are somewhat unsavory. Why is that? Most people in the Democratic and Republican establishment have some people who, for the most part, are crossed off the list in regards to us dealing with. Why is it that you're okay in talking to these various people around the world? That question could have been phrased in all sorts of ways. She decided to make it a prosecutorial thing, almost passive-aggressive. And I'm saying that from the standpoint of this kind of psychiatrist voice, or the voice of your wife when she's angry at you, which maybe that's what's annoying me. It's not annoying me, it's the question. But it's a passive-aggressive question. The question is somewhat aggressive in the way it's asked. Let's let her finish.
Assad, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi from Libya, these are brutal dictators, and their people have seen harm, great harm, come from them. My policy has always been that the United States needs to stop acting as the world's police, needs to stop waging these costly regime change wars, because it does not serve the objectives and the interests of the American people, first of all. Second of all, it doesn't actually help the people that supposedly we are trying to help. Time and again, people in these countries see more death, more destruction, more suffering, more refugees coming about as a result of our going in and waging a regime change war. And it comes at a great cost to the American people. My brothers and sisters in uniform have sacrificed tremendously, losing their lives, coming home with lost limbs, coming home with invisible wounds. It has undermined our national security, strengthening terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So as president, I will end these wasteful wars, and I will meet with leaders of other countries, whether they be dictators or adversaries or potential adversaries. And I'm inspired by the examples of leaders who've come before us, leaders like JFK who met with Khrushchev. Roosevelt, who met with Stalin, a murderous dictator. There are so many different examples of leaders putting the interests of their people ahead of their political interests and exercising the kind of courage that we need to see in our leadership.
Well, and you're meeting with Assad.
I love that answer. I just wish he was more aggressive. That's all. Like that's... Maybe I think about this differently, but I'm not taking any shit off of a host trying to browbeat me about doing what is literally right. Think about what we're saying for the moment. Like I said before, we don't have the moral high ground on this stuff. And to ask her a question that is, if we do, I don't know. I would love a little bit of pushback on that. There is pushback. Don't misunderstand me in the way that Tulsi Gabbard answered. I think she, for the most part, nailed it. The perfect answer. Look, I will meet with whoever I need to meet with if it keeps us from going and getting into these conflicts that in no way help the people who we supposedly are there to help. Perfect. And true, by the way. When Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright put through those sanctions in Iraq, 500,000 kids. 500,000 kids died because of those sanctions that they put through in Iraq. And Madeleine Albright will sit there and says, yeah, I think that was absolutely necessary. Who do you think is being killed by the sanctions that are being put in place in Venezuela? Who do you think is being killed from the sanctions that are being put in place in Iran? The sanctions aren't there to help the people, by the way. The sanctions are there to create enough crisis and havoc within the country that they will topple the government. I hope you understand what I mean. The people who are in power are probably not ultimately hurt by the sanctions. The people who are poor and who are starving and who are already in a situation of destitution will be. That is in Venezuela. That is in Iran. Good answer. Punch more, but good answer.
Prompted outrage. Your colleagues passed a congressional resolution listing what his government has done, using chemical weapons against his people. Isn't there a way to say this person is a war criminal or a bully?
I have said that numerous times. I've said he's a brutal dictator. I mean, look, the reality is my interest is in the interest of the American people. I would meet with Assad again. I would meet with a brutal dictator if it meant the possibility of saving more American lives, preventing more of our troops going and putting their lives needlessly into harm's way to continue to wage these wars that politicians in Washington continue to call for. Well,
you've also visited with India's Prime Minister Modi, who's been behind violence against Muslims. You filed a resolution supporting Donald Trump's diplomacy in North Korea. Some people say you look more like Donald Trump because you're perceived as embracing these strongmen. And a former FBI special agent told the New York Times that you are the Kremlin's preferred Democrat because Russia wants to see the U.S. less involved in other countries. I'm just
here's
why
I'm laughing, because you're repeating all of the accusations coming from different political opponents who use smear tactics.
Just so we're clear, what the interviewer just said here is that Tulsi Gabbard is the Kremlin's preferred candidate. That's astonishing. Why is she the Kremlin's preferred candidate? It's the most interesting one. Because she doesn't want to get into a bunch of wars. And it seems like the host of this show does. Tulsi Gabbard's point of view is, look, if we can make a deal with North Korea is a sane government. They're rational actors in this process, far more rational than we've been. We've been talking about blowing people up and whatnot. Their thing is, we want you to stop pretending like you're going to invade us, working with South Korea. And fact of the matter is, if you let the peace process play out between the two, it probably would. Yeah, I am on board for this notion of not going to some kind of stupid war or provocation with North Korea. And fact of the matter is, North Korea has a nuclear weapon because it's terrified of us. And it's think we are going to topple them. And the wild point is, if they didn't have that nuclear weapon, we probably would. The weapon is a defense mechanism. It's not offensive in this case. It is to protect them against us. They've seen our behavior around the globe, our intervention in these various countries. The host, for whatever reason, doesn't know that. But they've seen it. They've seen what happened to Gaddafi. I guess my point is this. The host is taking every smear tactic that people have thrown out there and is just hitting her with it. That's all this is. This is not allowing her to get anything out from the standpoint of her campaign and everything else. This is her essentially having to de-smear herself because that's the interview that the interviewer is choosing to have. I find this to be astonishing. And the wild part about this is what the host is essentially saying is, look, the Democratic Party is not for any level of non-intervention. The Democratic Party is ultimately a war party. And as such, you are out of kilter with this party and you are more akin to the right wing. That's what the host is saying. Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, whatever you want to call her, non-intervention is a particular perspective of the world. I don't want to get involved in these countries. And the host, for the most part, ignored everything that Tulsi Gabbard just said, making the point that, look, the people who get hurt by this are not the people who we say we're aiming this at. Let's let her continue.
Tactics to try to undermine the message that I'm bringing that's challenging the military-industrial complex in Washington, making it out to seem as though meeting with leaders of other nations is somehow cozying up or embracing them or all of these other things, when in fact, leadership means choosing diplomacy ahead of doing what's politically popular. I didn't go to Washington to make the Democratic Party happy, to make the establishment happy. I went there to fight for the well-being of the people of our country.
Well, Republican Senator Rand Paul and conservative commentator for some of your comments. So
Here's
not
the
just
thing that I want to make clear. While you're bringing up some folks on the right, in the town halls that we are having, what we're seeing across the country is that my message, one of ending these wasteful regime change wars, this is a message that's resonating with Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, people who we may disagree with on other issues, but who are coming together recognizing that we, the American people, are paying for the cost of war, and now is the time to end it.
Congresswoman Gabbard, I want to ask you about a perception of you, and a lot of this has been about perception. We read the New York Magazine profile, an extensive profile of your childhood, and we also learned of your parents being devotees of Chris Butler, widely referred to as a cult leader. His group, The Science of Identity, it seemed to be an offshoot of the Hare Krishna.
You know what I would love to do is for our conversation to be focused on me, not my parents.
Do you think it's inappropriate to ask a presidential candidate about growing up in a home with shrines to a man who...
Right here. Tulsi is offended. She's offended. She's pissed off. Now, this woman has essentially smeared her the entire interview, and now she is going into this notion of her childhood. And Tulsi's point is, why are you bringing my dad into this? And for the most part, I've been giving you my political philosophy. If you want to know something about me, just ask. She's called her dad, saying her dad was in a cult. How did she think she was going to take that? I mean, think about it for the moment. You have all sorts of people in religion. I grew up with my mom dragging me to church. I went with my mom, I think it was like 2-3 years ago. It was some function that she was in. And I got to be honest, I thought those people were lunatics. Now, I say that to say, that's my perspective of them. She's probably familiar with that particular religion, but she doesn't look at that religion in those terms. Like, why is Christianity not a cult, but these other things are? I got to be honest, I never understand that particular perspective of things. I understand there's some people who are in Christianity who are, let's say, secular Christians of sorts, meaning in the way that they interact with the world. And if I'm being honest, most people that I know who are part of Christianity, for the most part, just conform it to how they are. Meaning if they need to have sex, they have sex. If they need to do X, they do X. If they need to lie and curse, they lie and curse. They still go to church on Sundays. It's like, look, I'm going to do my thing, but just in case this God thing turns out to be true, I want to, have those in. I would imagine if you grew up with your dad, this question would be deeply offensive. And I suspect she is very pissed off at this point because this interview doesn't last much longer.
And who is considered a cult leader?
I do. I think that's a very religious, bigoted question to ask, because it just shows the lack of even interest or understanding about what Hinduism, Vaishnava Hinduism, is about. Right now, you're taking misinformation, smears, and bigoted attacks from other media sources and trying to pose them as sincere questions, and I think that's offensive.
Well, I'm sorry that you do, because I think a lot of people are interested in, someone who grew up in a home that followed a man.
And by the way, why is this even relevant? Like, this is not relevant. Like, this is literally nothing to do with her running for presidency. I gotta be honest, I have no idea how this question gets into an honest and earnest interview. And that makes me think at this point, it's not. If you want to know who she is, and you want to judge her by what she says, judge her by what she does, judge her by what she's voted on. There's all sorts of things that you can judge her by. Can you really judge her for her dad? I mean, you're essentially saying, hey, you grew up in a home that was of a particular sort. Can we ask you now and delve into what we consider to be a cult? I don't think Tulsi Gabbard considers her upbringing to be a cult. You've just offended her. And this interview doesn't last much longer.
A man who taught sexual conservatism, skepticism of science. Your father became an activist against gay marriage.
Once again, Robin, I'm sorry to interrupt, because you're saying things that are not based in fact, and you're repeating smears and things that are coming
you
from
have
other
apologized
folks.
For the work that you did on behalf of your father.
Yeah, so ask me about my positions.
Okay.
Ask me about things that I've said and that I've done.
Well, this was only going to be a short synopsis of some of that, to ask you to debunk, if you'd like, the thinking on the part of some that you are still even running as part of Chris Butler's group.
Look, I don't know how to seriously answer.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing question. You were brought up in a home that was a part of this cult. And we just want to be sure that you're not still secretly part of this cult. And Tulsi Gabbard, rightfully indignant, I have no idea how to even answer that question. Like, how can I honestly and take that seriously? You're asking me if I am currently part of a cult and essentially part of this particular mold of thinking, despite the fact that nothing I have done for the last, 10, 15 years would attest to such. That's an amazing question. Can you imagine being asked something about your dad? She's pissed off. I think she's rightfully pissed off.
Answer a question in the way that you've posed it, because you're not even trying to understand my own spiritual practice as a Vaishnava Hindu.
Well, no, tell me about it. Tell me about it. What does that mean?
Sure, absolutely. Vaishnava Hinduism, the practice that I follow, is a monotheistic branch of Hinduism that is centered around love for God and love for others, and how best we can be pleasing to God through the practice of karma yoga, which means taking action to serve others, to protect our planet, and to develop my own personal loving relationship with God.
Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
I think we've got to get going.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
And she was gone. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, the Democratic presidential candidate.
Yes, she was gone because you massively offended her and pissed her off.
Iran saying something, and they just seem to...
I can't believe they've gotten this bad. Like, honestly, I'm astonished by this interview. I can't. I remember I used to listen to NPR and like podcasts when, just driving and these type of things, especially like in New York and whatnot. I have no idea how they've gotten to be this bad. I have no idea. All right. I was silenced by Tulsi? What are you talking about? All people should be able to watch live stream without it freezing. Oh, it froze? Alright. Well, if this one is bad, I will upload the other video then. Like, share, subscribe. think so.